Welcome back to Todos Santos. Today we're going to fill in these awkward gaps around the port with a logistics hub and 2 industrial sectors. Let's go. So industrial builds in this game tend to generate a lot of traffic, so we need to make sure that our trucks have good access to this area that we're going to build. So I wanted to create a sort of hybrid cloverleaf and normal intersection here. So there's a crossroad that also serves as an off-ramp from the freeway to this bridge, which crosses back over the freeway and accesses the port area. And that'll give our trucks good access to the other side of the industrial area. Although, if I'm being honest, I just built this because I thought it looked cool to have a cloverleaf ramp here. But anyway, just need to beautify it up with IMT. Well, it's not really beautiful, it's just a slab of pavement, but I think you get the idea. So now that that's all done, we have this issue of this rail line here. Now, obviously we can't really redirect it because there's a station over here on the left, and then it has to cross over the interchange here. So I decided just to have the rail line run right through the middle of the logistics hub, which I thought was kind of a cool idea. And it also serves as some sort of motivating factor to figure out where to place all these warehouses. As for the buildings themselves, we have a couple of mail services. So we have like the local mail service would be this big warehouse here. And then there's I think I end up branding it as DHL up here, and the rest of these warehouses would just be generic industrial warehouses storing really whatever you want. So we're kind of consolidating all the different delivery services you might expect in a city into one area. We're using a few custom assets, but then the majority of these smaller warehouses are from the Industries DLC. We even have this one that technically has a rail connection. Unfortunately, we don't have any cargo rail in the city, so I turned that into a PO to get rid of all the extra stuff. I just really like the look of that building, so we're going to decorate it to make it fit in and clean up any of the weirdness that results from turning it into a PO in just a minute. And so once I've gotten a somewhat suitable arrangement, we're going to start laying down a very basic road network. I took inspiration from this cluster of warehouses in the equivalent area in San Juan. And so I tried to go for somewhat of a similar road network, really though just trying to fit them in the spaces in between the warehouses. All of this is going to change quite a bit as we go into the detailing phase in a minute, but I think it's really helpful to just start with a basic layout, even if you know you're going to change it significantly later on. And also, I didn't want to have too much excess space. It doesn't make sense that you would buy a bunch of land to build a warehouse and then just plop a tiny warehouse on it. So I do have to turn some of these vanilla ones into POs and just size them up a little bit. But these assets just look really nice. Some of the Industries DLC ones are just phenomenal. Now, you may have noticed that I had to delete the rail line above here just to get the proper arrangement of warehouses going. And then I wanted to be very careful to make sure that all the pillars were in the right place and we didn't have any weird clipping with these warehouses. So I just used network skins to remove the built-in pillars on the metro line. And then I add in these custom North American freeway pillars, turn them into POs so that we can adjust their size and shape as need be, and place them where it makes sense, trying to get a reasonable amount of space in between each pillar without it looking like there would be sections that would just collapse. I really only had trouble with that over here, where there needs to be quite a long span without a pillar, so I have to squeeze these 2 pillars right up against the building. It does look a little awkward, but I think that's the kind of compromise you could imagine them making in this sort of build. And maybe that's even why this logistics hub sprung up here in the first place in this precise area, because the land was cheap, because it's right beneath the metro. I don't know. I wanted to stick with our Todos Santos theme of having light-colored roofs, which is something I learned quite a while ago, is that most of the roofs in San Juan are not dark. Although I have noticed on Google Earth that there are a few here and there, but I thought it just looked really sleek to get this light-colored roof above here. I'm just using the Roof Networks by Ronix. All of these assets I'm talking about you can find in my asset collection, which are linked in the description. Now I'm doing this kind of strange thing where I clipped this mail sorting facility into this warehouse because I wanted this to serve as the main mail service in the city. And as it is, it's just a warehouse. It doesn't actually function as a post office. And I also clip a couple of these post office blocks in here too. And this thing generates a lot of traffic. And this is something I've seen in other videos as well, is that these mail sorting facilities just really pump out these trucks constantly. But that's really what I'm going for with this kind of area. I want it to be a busy industrial area. And yeah, that's what we get. But you'll see that in the cinematics. Now I do the same thing with the little DHL warehouse over here, except I don't clip the sorting facility in there because first of all, there's not enough space, and second of all, I figured it would generate way too much traffic. I also try to clip some office blocks here and there into these warehouses just to generate a bunch of jobs in this area without generating a bunch of additional industrial traffic. And I feel like the distinction between industrial and office jobs is not as clear in real life as it is in City Skylines, which is fine. You don't need to have a perfect simulation in the game. Basically what I'm trying to say is that I think it makes perfect sense to have some of these jobs categorized as office jobs. That being said, I do also put down a couple of these industrial blocks here and there, just making sure they generate the right cars using I believe the transfer controller mod is what that's called. I could be wrong. And then we come through and obviously we've turned many of these warehouses into POs, so we're going to have them actually function as warehouses by putting down some of these warehouse blocks. And I'm just going to set those to fill up with whatever goods we're going to need in some of the factories we're going to put down later on in the series and that kind of stuff. And then any remaining warehouse blocks I'm just going to set to commercial goods just in case our stores run out of stuff. These warehouses need just a little bit of TLC because when I turn them into POs, they seem to lose like a sub-building that covered up this end. So I just make another copy of the warehouse to cover up those empty gaps. So now that we've got the main layout and all the buildings set up properly, it's time to do a little bit of detailing. And that's mostly going to involve a whole lot of these container trailers. But there are also a few things here and there where we need some retaining walls to cover up gaps in between this area because it is down in a little bit of a bowl. So there are some weird gaps and cliffs around it that we need to cover up. One thing I noticed from the inspiration is that they really seem to have trailers pretty much everywhere. So even along the roads, you're going to have trailers parked, where you would normally have cars parked. So I'm going to try to integrate things like that here and there. So this place just really looks like it's bursting at the seams with trailers. I also found that there was quite a push and pull in between dedicating space to trailers and dedicating space to parking, because you're going to have a lot of people coming to work here, and we're in a car-centric city, so we're going to need lots of parking. But what I did was I tried to go through and add these trailers first and, delete any parking that is getting in the way of that. And then what we're going to do once all the trailers are down is dedicate any remaining pavement to parking. That was the theoretical approach I came up with, at least. So let's see how that plays out. We ended up with a small problem here in the center in that I wanted to try to have like 3 or 4 warehouses spread out across this vast area of pavement with a bunch of parking, but it just wasn't working because there wasn't room to have trailers and parking like I wanted. So I decided to rethink this and just have 2 of these larger warehouses instead of 3 of the smaller ones. And that way we can drag out these giant parking lot roads in between each of them. And then in the center here, there's enough space to have a bunch of trailers. And then on the ones on the edge, there's enough space to have 1 row of trailers against the warehouse, and then the far end is going to be filled with parking. I thought it would also be a kind of funny contrast to have this one older looking warehouse with a rusty roof. So with all these trailers attached to their corresponding warehouses, I wanted to add a whole bunch of random trailers along the road, like I mentioned before. One issue with this is that because they're props, they like to float, especially above these sunken roads, so you have to turn them into POs and lower them. Because if you just lower them as props, they're going to pop right back up next time you load your save, which is no good. So we got to do that. And like I said, a whole bunch of these. Now along this CIM warehouse, CIM, that I kind of arbitrarily chose that as the city's mail service, which is kind of funny because they also have like these vanilla ones and then this USPS one. Anyway, this is the one I chose. So they have a whole bunch of these cute little Sprinter vans parked along the side. Obviously, that seems like probably too many of them here. So I'm going to go back through and thin the herd just a little bit so that it looks more realistic. Because obviously some of them are going to be out doing their rounds instead of being parked here. I thought this postal warehouse in particular would have a lot of employees, so there's a dedicated parking lot out back. And then over on the other side of the logistics hub, there's a secondary parking lot next to this warehouse. Okay, now all the main features are done. It's time to do the very satisfying task of covering this place in pavement. And I talked about this issue last episode, but we also have to cover up some of these ruining textures with ploppable grass and a couple of planters here and there as well. And I think that just really cleans up the look and makes it look nice and landscape. And I'm thinking this place would be fairly nicely landscaped. It's a pretty modern and maybe more sanitized kind of place than some of the other industry we're going to build later on in this episode. So they're going to have some nicely trimmed grass and some decorative plants that we're going to add later on. Now we have this highway elevated up above. Like I mentioned, this place is kind of down in a little bit of a depression or a bowl. So we have, instead of doing like a sound barrier or a basic fence, I thought it would be kind of nice to just have this plaster wall along the freeway. Although we are going to add a chain link fence down on the lower parts because that's kind of more down in the industrial area, so they don't care quite as much what it looks like. Because this whole area is fenced off, of course we have to make a gate as well, because at night they'd want to shut this place down and keep people out. So I just imagine that those chain link fences there would also serve as gates that could be extended and close off the road. And also, because it's the main entrance, I thought it would be a nice gesture just to put just a couple of planters there. To finish up the logistics hub part of this build, we're going to put down a few trees here and there in the main campus. We're using our usual decorative trees, acacias, crown trees. I think I put a couple of live oaks down there as well, and of course, some palms. I think I did, I'm pretty proud of myself for going pretty sparse this time compared to usual, and I don't like the plain grass texture, so I'm just going through and adding some of these mountain grass props as well. And one last detail, I looked at this place from above and realized there weren't nearly enough trailers, so we're going to add just a few rows of random trailers here and over here. So this part of the build's done, and we're going to move on to the vast industrial area. We're going to start our industrial expansion with this strange little pocket of land in between this large warehouse and this freeway interchange. So there's going to be a mix of office and industrial here. So we have this tall office tower that I just think really fits in right next to the highway. It has a little extension wing over here with this dark building and a big parking lot around back, of course. The remaining space we're going to fill in with a lovely collection of light industrial buildings by Spence, which I'll link in the description. They come in a variety of sizes and shapes and colors, but I just think especially the aerial view just looks really nice with the textures on these roofs. This arrangement here was really just a trial run because we're going to be filling a huge amount of the port area with this kind of building, so I wanted to just do this little trial run and see what kind of setup we could get. The main thing I wasn't sure about was, should I have these buildings be wall-to-wall for the most part or be separated for the most part? And I found that putting too many of them wall-to-wall looked really awkward and just unnatural. So what I do is usually have clusters, so there will be one or two buildings side by side, and then those clusters will be spaced out with enough room for just a little bit of parking in between each building. And that's going to allow us to easily get some detail and some realism into this build without having to go through and spend hours and hours detailing every single block. Okay, now we're going to move on to the main area where we're going to be doing this industrial build. So what I really wanted to go for was, well, as usual, the Google Earth view. And I think there's a very distinctive look to industrial areas like this, where you just have lots of these fairly regularly shaped buildings, usually 1 or 2 stories, just arranged in a pretty regular grid pattern. So as you can see, at first I tried clustering the buildings too closely together. It just looks a little unnatural. There's no room for trucks to come and go to get around the buildings. There's no room for parking. So that's something I get better at as we go through. And I try to move away from my inclination, which is to push these buildings right up against one another. So at this point, I think I was starting to get the idea that I was packing these buildings too closely together, but I still think it looks a little bit unnatural. So we're going to give it another shot, moving across south of the main avenue here, and closer to the cargo port, where things are going to be set up a little bit differently. We have a couple of office buildings here. I'm thinking maybe these would be like additional administration for the operation of the port, but there are a few of the usual industrial buildings thrown in as well. And in trying to figure out how to detail this place, I decided to go with the usual, which is just putting down a bunch of cars. And this actually opened me up to the possibility that maybe I was packing these buildings a little bit too closely together. And when I saw all these cars parked along here, it just really looked like an industrial area to me. So that kind of prompted me to start giving a little bit more breathing room to these buildings, especially as we move on to the next area. Although, of course, before we do that, we gotta pave over this place and maybe add a couple more details, like some trees here, and I thought it would be nice on this nice flat plain roof to add some solar panels. And I also jumped back over to the original part of the industrial area that we made and added so many cars. Lots and lots of parking. It does get old pretty quickly, so we're just going to speed through that and move on to that other industrial area I was talking about, which is a bit farther over to the east. We have this area where the outlet from the river into the bay goes underneath and into a buried tunnel, a buried channel, whatever you want to call it. But I thought we needed some barriers here. It doesn't seem very safe to just have this open, even in an industrial area. So I put a couple barriers there. And now we have this interesting warehouse here. Now this Frio dock asset is being used as the refrigerated warehouse, a part of our cargo port, but I just like this asset so much that I wanted to have this here and just add a little bit of variation to the silhouettes of the buildings when you look down at this area from above. So we're going to fence it off with this really, really nice rusted fence asset. I just think that looks like something you'd see in an industrial area like this. And I'm just trying to leave enough room for trucks to be able to actually pull out with these trailers attached. And just like when we made the port build, I'm using some containers to build basically a fence over on that side. I just thought that looked kind of cool. And we're going to wear down the pavement with some decals. After detailing this entrance just super quickly with some grass and a single palm tree, some bushes, I guess, I thought it would be kind of cool to have this little passage here over on this side where we have the power lines running through. Those were there anyway, so I thought might as well just use that as motivation for detailing. And then we have this overgrown network that I mentioned a couple episodes ago running through there. And of course, we're going to have buildings backed up against that. So there's just going to be this skinny channel for these power lines to run through. And I thought that looked kind of cool and vaguely industrial. Okay, now we're going to give it another shot at making it this kind of industrial area. I'm going to speed it up a little bit since you already saw the other one at some length. It's basically the same thing, just done a little bit better. Instead of extending this kind of generic industrial stuff all the way up to this avenue here and this main intersection, I wanted to do something that seems like a bit more of a signature location. Because this is, after all, the main entrance to the entire industrial area of Todos Santos. So what we have is just a waste transfer center, recycling center. So you would drive in, drop off whatever stuff you want them to take to the landfill, they'd sort it out, and then send it on a truck to either be sent off for recycling or to go to the landfill. So I'm scrolling through pretty much my entire prop collection, looking for various things that you might see at this sort of place. And I'm going to try to arrange them into some kind of basic organization or categories, because I imagine these sorts of places would have to be relatively organized. Otherwise, you're going to not be able to keep track of what's what and what's going where. So this area underneath the corrugated roof here, that would be like the self-serve area. So you would drive in and there are just containers for glass, paper, cardboard, whatever. You toss your crap in there and then you leave. But there's also going to be kind of a more industrial area. I could imagine they would serve all these industries as well, taking care of the slightly more hazardous stuff, hazardous waste. And of course, they also have to have some of these trailers, as all of these places seem to do. I don't know if these would actually be used by this recycling center, or if they're just like things that they possess for refurbishing and selling or whatever. There's also a tiny little office here where they would take care of all the logistical matters. It's also a pretty handy place to hide an office block so that we can actually have some jobs attributed to this place. And to make this place functional, I'm going to hide a garbage service block in here and set it to only spawn these waste transfer trucks, which honestly is just pretty immersive. I mean, those assets just look really nice, and it kind of makes sense that these constantly would be pumped out of here and sent over to the landfill. Just going to finish detailing this place with some basic decals and weeds on the ground, and then change the ground texture to our oil texture, which looks like a nice worn dirt. Forgot to finish up this industrial sector with just a little bit of pavement and some stain decals. Now we're basically done with this part of the industry, except for we got to do a little bit of lighting. Of course, to go for that industrial look, I want to use some of these, I believe they're sodium vapor streetlights. I just think that looks really cool, and the sum total of it, looking at it from a distance, is pretty nice. There are some orangey ones over here, and some kind of more yellow ones over there. I'm not sure if I like the difference. Maybe I should go back and make those a little bit more uniform. Let me know what you think of that. Okay, very last thing. Over north of the logistics hub, I added another industrial zone, just like the other ones. It's a little bit less detailed and less interesting, so we're just going to do this before and after. That's it for this episode of Todos Santos. I really hope you enjoyed, and I can't wait to see you on the next one. Bye!